Almost didn't notice when my son set his glass down twice. We were sitting at the Thanksgiving table. Me, my son, his girlfriend, and my sister and her husband, who had driven up from Raleigh. The turkey was on the table. The candles were lit. Everything looked the way Thanksgiving is supposed to look, and I was telling myself to just enjoy it, to stop watching the corners of things. His girlfriend, her name was Simone, was pouring wine and saying something about how beautiful the house was, how she'd always loved older homes with character, how the crown molding in the dining room was original, wasn't it? I said yes. I bought the house in 2009, after the divorce, when the market was low and I needed somewhere to start over. It has 3 bedrooms and a backyard that floods a little in March. It is not a beautiful house. It is a house I have kept. You must have gotten a great deal on it, she said, and my son set his glass of water down on the table. Twice. Small. Deliberate, his fingers around the base, down once, then down again. I looked at him. He was already looking at his plate. I kept my face still. I reached for the breadbasket and said something about the cranberry sauce, and the moment passed, and nobody at the table knew that anything had happened at all. But I knew, because that signal was ours, and we had made it together, and I had not heard it in 11 years. My son's name is Owen. He's 26 now, works in logistics coordination for a regional freight company outside Charlotte. He's smart in a practical way, not flashy, not the kind of smart that announces itself, the kind that shows up in the details. When he was 15, he went through a rough patch. His mother and I had finalized the divorce, and he'd moved with her to a different school district, and I think the combination of all of it, the new school, the new house, the new version of his family, landed harder on him than either of us understood at the time. There was a period where he'd get into situations he didn't know how to leave, parties he hadn't planned on, cars with people he didn't entirely trust. He wasn't a bad kid. He was a kid who hadn't learned yet to say no out loud. We made the signal during a drive home from a movie, just the two of us, sometime in October. He said something offhand about how it was hard sometimes to ask for help when other people were around, and I said I understood that, and I told him about a time when I was his age that I'd wanted to leave somewhere badly and hadn't known how. We worked it out in the car. If he ever needed me, if something felt wrong and he couldn't say it plainly, he'd set something down twice, a glass, a phone, a fork, didn't matter what, twice, deliberate, and I would know. He used it once. Sophomore year, a bonfire at someone's house I didn't recognize. I got the text, just his location, no message, and I drove there, and when I walked up he said he was tired and wanted to go home, and nobody questioned it because I was just his dad coming to get him, and in the car we sat in silence for a while, and then he said thank you. After that, nothing. Years went by. He graduated. He got his own apartment. He started dating Simone about 8 months before that Thanksgiving, and when he'd mentioned her, he'd sounded happy, genuinely happy. She had a good job, he said. She was motivated. She knew what she wanted. I had been glad for him. Simone had been the one to suggest Thanksgiving at my house. Owen mentioned it in early November, almost apologetically, like he was asking a favor. He said Simone's family was in Phoenix and she wasn't flying out this year, and he'd thought maybe the 3 of us, plus my sister Sandra and her husband Gerald, could do it together, make it a real holiday. I said, of course, I meant it. She arrived with Owen a little after noon, carrying a dish she'd made herself, some kind of sweet potato casserole with a brown sugar crust, and she was warm and easy to talk to, and she complimented Sandra's earrings and helped carry things to the kitchen without being asked. I watched her the way you watch anyone new in your house, not suspiciously, just observantly. She seemed genuine, but she asked questions, not all at once, not in a way that felt like an interrogation. It was woven in, natural feeling, the way a skilled interviewer moves from small talk to substance without you noticing the transition. She asked about my work. I'm a risk analyst for an insurance firm. I've been doing it for 19 years, and I've gotten to a level where I manage a team more than I run the numbers myself, but I still understand the numbers, and people who talk to me about money usually don't get very far before they realize that. She asked about the house, how long I'd owned it, what the neighborhood was like now compared to before, whether I had plans to stay long-term, or if I'd thought about downsizing. She asked at one point whether I'd put anything in the market this year given the rates. I said something non-committal. I'm a private person with money. That's not unusual. I think most people my age who've been through a divorce and a recession and 2 rounds of layoffs at previous jobs develop a certain habit of not talking about finances with people they've known for 3 hours. But I noticed the questions. I filed them. And then my son set his glass down twice. After dinner, after the dishes were cleared and Gerald had fallen asleep in the armchair and Sandra and Simone were in the kitchen talking about something, I found a moment to stand near Owen by the back door. I didn't say anything directly. I just stood next to him, and after a moment he said, quietly, "Not tonight. I'll call you." I nodded. I didn't push. That had always been part of the agreement. The signal meant, I see it. I'm aware. Help me when you can. It wasn't a fire alarm. It was a flag. He called me 2 days later on a Sunday morning and he talked for a long time. He told me that things had been shifting with Simone over the past few weeks in ways he couldn't fully articulate, but couldn't ignore either. She'd started bringing up money more, his savings, what he had put away, what I might have. She'd asked once, in what he said felt like a practiced casual way, whether I had any investments outside my 401k. She'd mentioned twice that she knew a financial advisor, someone she called a close friend, who had a product he was really excited about. Very limited access, very good returns. Owen had told her he'd think about it. But something about the dinner had crystallized it for him. The way she'd moved through my house, the way she'd asked the questions. He said it felt like reconnaissance. He'd used that word, reconnaissance. And when she'd pushed a little about whether I'd gotten a good deal on the house back when I bought it, something had locked into place in his head, and his hands had moved before he'd even made a conscious decision. He said, "Dad, I think she's running a script." I asked him to tell me everything from the beginning. I want to be careful about how I describe what I found out over the following 3 weeks, because some of it is still not entirely clear to me, and I'm not a detective. What I am is someone who has spent nearly 2 decades evaluating risk, reading policy language, and identifying the patterns underneath what people present on the surface. Simone was not obviously a criminal. She had a real job, administrative work at a dental group, verifiable, above board. She paid her rent. She had a car registered in her name. She was not a ghost. But the financial advisor she kept mentioning, I asked Owen to get me a name. He got me a name. I looked it up. The man was not registered with FinRay. He had no verifiable licensing. He had a website that was slick and recent and looked exactly like 1,000 other investment websites, except that when I ran the domain registration, it was 14 months old, and when I searched the address listed on the site, it was a UPS store in Ballantyne. The product Owen had been nudged toward. I got enough details to recognize the structure. It was a promissory note scheme. Private lending, guaranteed returns, very exclusive. I have seen variations of this in my work. It is not new. It is dressed up in different clothes every few years, but the bones are always the same. I didn't say anything to Simone. Not yet. I wanted to understand the shape of it first. Not just react. I called a contact of mine at the State Securities Division. I'd worked with her peripherally on a fraud case a few years back, and she knew her field. I described what I had. She told me they had seen similar patterns recently, and she asked me to send her what I'd gathered. I did. In the meantime, I had a harder conversation with Owen. Not harder in the sense of conflict. Harder in the sense of sitting across from your son and watching him work through the embarrassment of having been slowly, carefully moved towards something without realizing it. He's a smart kid. He knows he's a smart kid. And that particular kind of realization, that intelligence doesn't immunize you. That skillful manipulation is skillful precisely because it doesn't feel like manipulation. That's a painful thing to sit with. I told him it wasn't about being fooled. I told him that the people who run these things are practiced. They know exactly how to make the approach feel like a natural relationship, how to let time build trust, how to make the ask feel small and reasonable by the time it comes. He said, "But I liked her. I actually liked her." I said, "I know." I told him that the two things weren't mutually exclusive. People who run these schemes are often genuinely likable. That's the point. If they weren't, they wouldn't get anywhere near your finances. He was quiet for a while, and then he said, "Did she like me at all, do you think?" I didn't know how to answer that honestly, so I said the only true thing I had. I don't know. And I think that's something you'll have to make peace with, not knowing. The conversation with Simone happened on a Saturday afternoon in early December. Owen had asked me if I wanted to be there, and I said it was his call, and he said he wanted me there for the financial part at least. We met at Owen's apartment. She came in looking relaxed, like it was any other afternoon. Owen had made coffee. The apartment was clean and quiet. He started it. He told her what he knew about the advisor, about the registration check, about the address. He said it calmly, without accusations layered in, just the facts in sequence. I'd coached him a little on that. Lead with what you can prove. Her first reaction was to look at me, not at Owen, at me. There was a moment where I could see her recalibrating. She tried a couple of angles. She said she had no idea about the advisor's licensing, that she'd trusted him too, that she was just as shocked as we were. She said the whole thing might be a misunderstanding. I said that might be. And that the State Securities Division was sorting through exactly that, and that she'd likely hear from them as part of the review. That was the moment she stopped trying. She didn't make a scene. She picked up her bag and she left, and the door closed, and Owen and I sat at his kitchen table and didn't say anything for a while. He poured himself more coffee. He said, "I should have used the signal sooner." I said, "You used it when you were ready. That was enough." He looked at me for a moment, and then he said something I wasn't expecting. He said, "I forgot we had it." I mean, I never forgot it. But I think I stopped thinking of it as something I could actually use, like it was from when I was a kid. I said, "That's okay." It waited. We sat there for a while longer. Outside, the first real cold of the season had moved in. You could feel it at the edges of the windows. That particular December quiet, the kind that makes everything feel smaller and more specific. The coffee got cold. Neither of us moved to fix it. There are things you build with your kids without knowing you're building them. Little structures made from the right words at the right time, a car ride home from a movie, a decision to be the person they can reach without having to explain everything first. You don't know when you're making them that they'll matter. You don't know that 15 years later, at a holiday table you've set too many times to count. A glass coming down twice will be the thing that changes the shape of what happens next. I know now, and I think about the signal sometimes, not with relief exactly, but with something quieter than that. Gratitude, maybe. Or just the simple weight of knowing that some things hold. We didn't hear much from Simone after that. The advisor she'd been connected to became part of an investigation that I understand is ongoing. I don't know the details beyond what my contact has been able to share generally, and I've stopped looking for them. That's not my story to finish. My part of it ended at the kitchen table in the December cold, with my son across from me and the coffee going cold between us, and both of us, for the first time in a long time, just sitting with how far we had come from that night in the car when he was 15, and we decided together that we would always find a way to tell each other the truth. I've thought a lot about what it actually took for that signal to work, not just the 2 taps of a glass, but everything underneath them. It took Owen knowing at 26 that asking for help wasn't a failure. That's not a small thing. Most men his age, most people, honestly, would have talked themselves out of it. would have said they were overreacting, that they liked her, that they didn't have proof yet, that they'd handle it alone. He'd had every reason to stay quiet at that table, and instead his hands moved, and he trusted what we had built, and that trust is what changed everything. That's not instinct. That's character, the kind you grow slowly through a lot of smaller decisions about whether to be honest or convenient. And then there's what he did after. He didn't blow up. He didn't confront Simone in the heat of the moment, at the table, in front of my sister and Gerald, with the turkey still warm. He waited. He thought. He called me when he had enough to say, and when we finally sat across from her in his apartment, he led with what he could prove, not with what he felt. I've watched adults twice his age fail to do that, the ability to slow down when everything in you wants to react. That's something you have to practice, and I don't think Owen would have had it without the years he'd spent learning to think before he moved. That night at the bonfire when he was 15, he hadn't panicked. He'd sent a location. Even then, he'd understood that clarity was more useful than noise. What Simone and whoever she was connected to didn't account for was that the person they'd chosen to approach wasn't naive, and neither was his father. They'd run a careful operation. The relationship, the warmth, the patience of it, the way the questions arrived gently over months. It was well constructed, but it was constructed on a false assumption that Owen was isolated, that I was oblivious, that neither of us had the tools or the will to look closely. They miscalculated, and that miscalculation had real consequences. For the investigation, for whatever came after, the choices they made produced the outcome they got. That's not luck. That's just how it tends to go. I think about Owen sitting at his kitchen table in December asking whether she'd ever actually liked him. That question stays with me because it was the most honest thing he said that day. He didn't pretend it hadn't hurt. He didn't armor up and act like the whole thing was just a puzzle he'd solved. He let it be what it was, a loss alongside a relief, and he sat with that in a way that I think took more grit than any of the rest of it. The signal we made in the car when he was 15 wasn't about danger. Exactly. It was about connection. It was us deciding together that we would always find a way through to each other, no matter who was in the room, no matter how complicated it got. And 11 years later, at a Thanksgiving table, it held. That's the only thing I know how to pass on. Not money, not advice, not the right warnings at the right time. Just the decision, made early and kept, to be someone your kids can reach. Everything else tends to follow from that.